Syed, before I even start, it's amiss for me not to thank both Wesem and Hayat as hosts of this wonderful, wonderful community for giving this platform for people to come together, be in this kind of event, listen to other speakers, participate, especially now that we are opening up over the past year, the service and amazing work she's done to provide this platform for all of us who have been suffering from lockdown blues in various parts of the world. It's a huge service. So a huge, huge thank you to both of you. Wonderful, wonderful hosts of this platform. With that said, I'll start. Today we want to talk about and discuss about working in a multicultural and inclusive environment. So I'm going to explain that a little bit. I'm going to set up some concepts and then talk about some theories. This time it's for people who have seen my previous sessions. I'm going to be a little more deeper than normal because normally I like to keep things really simple at a high level so the maximum audience can get it. Today is going to be slightly different. I'm going to introduce some theoretical concepts as well, but I'd love for all of you to participate, ask questions. Please just put your hand up, unmute yourself, and ask questions at all stages. I've got the chat window up as well, so if you want to put something in the chat, I will read through that, and I will also respond to those. Okay, so before I go forward, Wesem was right. So she said, I'm not a coach. What happened last time when she introduced me was she said I run my own coaching company and I do my professional presentations. I did that at one point. I did set up my own website. I was a professional coach for a little while for a friend's coaching company. So I was doing coaching professionally for a little while, but now I do it more as a hobby. And as a hobby, I also do presentations for other groups and also for a few organizations, but it's more as a hobby. As I said, I haven't made any professional thing out of it at this point. I work in financial services, but I have a lot of background in coaching and presenting and a whole bunch of things. A few of those are in the bullet points, but the thing is, when I coach, it's also the fact that I am in the industry in a job, which means when I work with executives, etc., there's a little more connectivity to that. Okay, so in today's session, the main concepts and definitions I'd like to introduce is about the multicultural aspects. So working in a multicultural and inclusive environment, why do we do that, right? My premise to you is that the more multicultural and inclusive environment there is, it's positive, it increases productivity, and is enriching for personal and professional development to the group as a whole. And these are key concepts I want to bring out. So it's always positive to have a multicultural and inclusive environment, increases productivity, and I'll delve into how, and it also provides the opportunity for enriching your professional and personal development. Those are the concepts around which I'll talk about. So I'll split the session into about 4 components, which is the first one is how can we understand how humans are different? So what is human diversity? And how do we respond to the diversity around us? And we'll talk about conflict as well. We'll talk about what our reactions are. And there's a nice framework I want to present in terms of stages at which we respond to diversity. We'll also talk about how, having understood some of these concepts, how do we make it work for us? How can we take some simple steps to be better integrated, to increase our opportunity for personal, professional development, increasing productivity, and generally being positive? Okay, I always have a few assumptions. Nothing is easy. When we talk about practical elements, it's always tough. It's easy to summarize the steps, but to actually practice this is very difficult. So I'd never say it's not easy, that nothing is supposed to be And we are all humans, right? No one's perfect. You know, if I ask you, do you have any negative thoughts? You might say no. Do you have any weaknesses? You might say no. Well, deep down, we are all human. We all have capacities of how much we can do. We're not machines. We have emotions. We react. You know, it's a human thing, and none of us should worry about our humanness. It's more about self-awareness that'll take you far. Okay, so let's talk about human diversity. Let me ask a question. What makes human beings different? I'm going to just poll it out to the audience. If you want to put something in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself and just say a couple of words, what makes human beings different? Go on, don't be shy. Put something in the chat or unmute yourself and say something. Culture, Arturo says, good. Language, that's a good one as well. Anyone else? I'll give another 10, 20 seconds for anyone who wants to volunteer a couple of their thoughts on what makes human beings different.
Personal likes.
Personal likes, I like that. That's a good point. So I'm going to summarize an explanation framework. So the way we group human beings in our own mind, and this is just a framework, bear in mind, it's not the only way to do it, but this is a framework of groupings that'll help us understand how diversity happens and what happens there. Bear with me, my Zoom just crashed and it's going to come back in a second.
Whenever you finish, you are free to leave. Yeah? You can leave the room when you finish the exam.
Sorry, I missed that. Okay. You guys can see my screen now? Okay. So the first thing in terms of human groupings is sex, right? Whether we are male or female. That's the most fundamental and simplistic grouping. Roughly half the population is male, roughly half the population is female. So that's simplistic grouping we get. We get a grouping by age. Human groups, different generations, different age groups who, we talk of age of 30s and 40s, but think of the 5-year-olds, think of a 3-year-old, think of 10-year-olds. If you think of groupings at different ages and different stages of human development, age becomes a mechanism to group. If you suddenly turn up as a random 40-year-old in a 5-year-old's playground among the 5-year-olds, the 5-year-olds look at the 40-year-old and say, this is different, right? So there's a completely different element to it. So grouping happens in age. Some people mentioned about culture, etc., which is place of birth and race. And that's another way of grouping human beings. Where are you from? And generally, what is your ethnicity? Human ability is also another grouping, and human ability could be a different way. Some of us are athletes, some of us are less so, some of us are more able-bodied, some of us are less able-bodied. So groupings happen around human ability as well. Religion, of course, is a very, very common grouping. Religion, faith, your beliefs, etc., in the divine and the root to that. So religion is another human grouping. Education, different levels of educations. You'll find groups of human beings always around the similar levels of education. There's always certain elements of grouping. When I talk about grouping, obviously, if something doesn't fit in that group, it comes from outside, you are exposed to a diversity factor. And that's the reason I'm calling out these grouping elements. And also interests and views. So you can have left wing, right wing. Someone wants to ask a question? No. Okay. So you can have interests, views, whether it's beliefs, whatever it is, you group together as human beings based on your interests and views. And then professional levels as well, maybe there's a CEO's union, between CEOs, and maybe there's managers union, maybe there's programmers union, maybe there's, other levels. So what profession you do, at what level you are in, all those also create groupings. And every time you encounter something from outside of your group, there is a human reaction. So these are all the groupings I talk about. And what kind of impulses do you have when in your grouping, in your comfort grouping, you have a different person coming in? You get used to it, but there's always a first impulse that comes in as a human being. Anyone wants to take a guess and put something in the chat? Okay, so the first impulse you have when you meet someone from a different group, let's say you are a bunch of women, or a bunch of 25-year-olds, or a bunch of Asian origin, all from Philippines, etc., or wherever, and you meet someone different, human ability, all of these, the first impulse could be that of curiosity. What is this different grouping person bringing to a conversation, bringing to my ecosystem? Another impulse is worry, right? And I'm not saying you will have all of these impulses, but these are examples of impulses. It's all about self-awareness and seeing what is your immediate impulse when someone from a different comes in to your ecosystem. It could be worry, what this person doesn't look within my grouping. Is my comfort zone, is my comfort being changed? So is there a worry? Bias, you could be biased. You could be like, but he's not the same as us. We are all in a similar way. This guy is obviously different. You could subconsciously have a bias. I'm not saying you will. It's a possibility. That's one subconscious impulse. And bear in mind, it's a subconscious. It's not necessarily conscious. If I ask this audience, how many of you believe you are biased? I'd hazard a guess no one is going to put their hands up. But at some level, we all have our preferences that sometimes manifests itself in a slight bias every now and then. So there is an element of very intrinsic, very fundamental biases that exist within us. How we manage it and how it translates to behavior, that's what defines good behavior, bad behavior, and everything. But this is about the immediate impulse as a human being. There's judgment. You might have judgments about this new person who's come in. You might have an impression, oh, this guy's different, but maybe he's super impressed or super negative, or all those immediate impulses. Human brain is very, very programmed to create impressions and judgments of other human beings. It's a very natural human thing to do. Any questions in terms of, I introduce groupings of human beings, and I introduce what happens when you are comfortable in a particular group and someone from a different group arrives into your ecosystem. I'm talking of 4 or 5 very first impulses from inside you. Any questions? Any comments? Okay. So why is diversity important? I mentioned in my original definition that it creates positivity, it increases productivity. Why? How? Why is that important, and how does it increase your productivity and positivity? The starting point of understanding that is a premise, a very important premise. Each human journey is individual and creates a unique richness of experience, perception, views, abilities, and approaches. I'll pause 10 seconds and I'll repeat that. So each human journey is individual and creates a unique richness of experience, perceptions, views, abilities, and approaches. What does that mean? That means every human being is bringing something unique to the table in all circumstances. Because each individual is unique, each human journey is unique, we all have had the opportunity to bring something to the table, learn something unique. It's our human journey. The wider the diversity of the grouping, the more potential for diversity of thoughts and solutions to come into play. And this is, by the way, there are some real academic researches done in this. They actually studied multicultural teams, diversity, etc. It is an absolute fact that diversity increases innovation and creativity. But I won't quote some of the Harvard Business Review's researches and so on. All I'll say is, if you think of each human being as having an individual journey, everyone has some uniqueness in their perspectives. The more uniqueness and the more diversity you create, the more innovation and creativity you're bringing to the table. Right? So what does diversity do? Diversity increases innovation and creativity. Diversity reduces risk. So I don't know how many of you are aware of the term groupthink, and basically groupthink is when, just think of it this way, a family is there, let's say a father, a mother, a son, and a daughter. The son wants pizza, the daughter wants Chinese, the dad wants Indian, and the mom probably wants something else. And a lot of times you have a group thing where no one wants to give up. One of them maybe suggests an alternate option, and they decide to go down to the bar to eat a burger. And then the others kind of say, okay, it's not a pizza, it's not a Chinese, but at least it's a burger, it's not the other one. And they all go to the burger because they all try to become a group and just do the solution that's kind of, in the middle. But it's possible that that kind of solution is not the most efficient because no one's getting what they want and everyone's losing out. So that kind of a group think where you're all grouping together towards an outcome that's less than optimal for everyone, that's groupthink. By having diversity, you reduce that risk because people will then bring their own needs, etc., ideas to the table. Okay, and we talked about diversity. There's an empirical study, and I wanted to bring this out. We talk about different abled people. Think of all the people around different abled people. It's very important to consider this because I'm quoting actually an academic study. It says that an individual whose body has been damaged in an accident or is burdened with a mutation that renders his body radically different from other individuals is usually able to accommodate to such abnormality. In doing so, the individual may develop novel structures and behaviors not seen in other people. Such accommodation can be particularly marked when it occurs early in development. And the point here is different abled people, they bring a lot to the table from a diversity perspective because their journey is particularly unique in that respect. And they have had to overcome the nature of their different abled, whatever is the cause of their different ableness. That is usually hugely beneficial to bring that unique personality, unique perspective, unique ideas to the table. So it's very important that inclusivity comes in. So, a lot of big organizations, they talk about inclusivity, they talk about diversity. A lot of them, maybe some of them offer lip service, but a lot of them don't do it because it's a nice, good feeling. They actually do it because deep down they realize that by being more diverse and inclusive, it gives their organizations the best chance of success. it gives their organizations the best solutions, and ultimately that contributes to the top line. So it's not just an ethical thing, it's actually a business thing that diversity really, really brings to the capital growth. And so it's important to realize something. It's not just an ethical thing that you can park in the side. I'm not saying it's not, of course it is, but it's more than that. It contributes towards the top line if executed well. And so a lot of organizations are jumping on this, not just from a feeling of social responsibility and doing the right thing, but actually because it contributes to the top line. Any comments or observations on that? Okay, I'll take that one. Thanks, George. Okay, so as human beings, I talked about impulses, right? I talked about impulses when we meet someone from a different group. I want to bring about different stages, and this again is an empirical theory, but it's a good framework to understand. It's not necessarily that you go through every stage, but the framework can give you an idea to put yourself in a particular stage. So we talk of 6 stages as a human response to diversity. It's particularly relevant to cultural diversity, but you can apply it in any kind of diversity. Okay, the first stage is denial, right? And in this stage, the human being does not accept the differences. It says, we are who we are, human beings are all the same. There's no acceptance or even understanding of the fact that human beings are individual and different. So there's no reaching out, there's not even curiosity about it. It's just every human being is the same. I'll just stay in my huddle. I'll just deny that there is any differences around me. The second stage is defense. And defense is usually in the form, and you'll see this in the corporate environment when you speak to people, friends, etc. Acceptance that differences exist. Yes, that person from a different group is different, but you know what? I'm here. We are here. This is the best that can be, and everyone else should adapt to what we are. This is really. I know they're different, but tough. I'll just do what I do, and that's me. I just want to be me. I don't really worry about the differences. So that's the second stage. The third stage is minimization. Again, that's a little bit more than defense. It's one stage. You're not really defensive about it, but you minimize it. Most of us get it. We know that different people, but you know what? Again, we as this group in the defense, it's very individualistic. You are defensive, but in the minimization, you say, me and my friends around me, we are like this. We don't really care about how anyone else is. That's minimization. Now, let me ask this audience here, just a little hands up icon on your screen. How many of you know of people, or maybe you yourself have, in both cases, where you have encountered one of these stages, either in yourself or in someone else? Either way, just a hands up. Nobody's seen any of these 3 stages in their ecosystem.
No, we have few hands up. We do.
I see Vesam. I don't see anyone else's hand up.
No, there's Rina has got her hand up. Jose's got his hand up. Yeah, and there are other people that got other signs.
Okay, maybe there's something wrong in my setting. Apologies, guys. That's fantastic. Alex has got his hand up. Now I see it. Maybe I had a lag. But thank you. So you see, that's very common. So these are the 3, I wouldn't say negative, but more primitive responses to cultural and general differences in terms of human diversity. These are the stages where it starts to become a little more positive. So this is where people accept the difference, but they're reactionary. So this is not proactive, this thing. So this manifests itself in people who will say something and that person took that badly. I'll have to go and make it up and say sorry, but it shouldn't really be a big deal. So they accept it, and then they kind of react to it. If they don't proactively try and bridge gaps in communications, curiosity, etc., they accept that sometimes they might say things that's not appropriate. They accept that differences are there. They accept that, you know, people are different, but there's nothing proactive, there's nothing curious about it, and there's no real bridging that happens. A stage further down is adaptation. Adaptation is when you really start to build bridges. You're curious to know more. You're still who you are. You haven't changed any of your behavior, but you're trying to adapt. You're checking, you're understanding, you're learning, you're curious, etc. So that's the fifth stage, and that's the stage where a lot of people find themselves in, where there are diversity around you. You acknowledge that there's some curiosity, you want to learn more, so you go around. And the last stage, which is integration. Integration stage, I will invite you to consider that not many people are that level of comfort, which is high level comfort, shared spaces, and it's all communication is culturally efficient. And it's a very important point, and I'm going to stress on that in the next slide. But the communication is all culturally sensitive, but not just sensitive, but also efficient in terms of you understand the right things to say to different cultures, you understand where they come from, you're able to naturally interpret some of their cultural nuances when they're communicating, etc. And everything is natural and it's efficient. That's the integration stage. That's the most optimal stage that I invite you to consider. Not many human beings achieve that consistently. Now, the thing about this framework of stages is we are all there in different stages in different times. I would invite you to consider that it's not a fixed across stages. There might be an environment in which you're in an integration stage, but you might go to a different environment, different cultural diversity, and you might need to go back to acceptance and adaptation. In some cases, you might even suffer from minimization or defense. So it's very possible that you go through these stages, but by having the framework, you have the opportunity to reflect. So Taos, you said you work in a diverse, in a culturally diverse community. Would you like to share with us the different groups and your reaction to this group? And do you see people in different groups like this around you?
Yes, hi everyone.
Hi.
Yes, it's gonna be 8 or around 12 years. I'm working in joint venture company, and I face people from around 15 nationalities and with different ethnical and cultural. And I had this experience for integration and acceptance and break bridges between each other and get knowledge and get to know their culture and their culture and customs. And the same also, they are curious and they get adapted here in my country. So I think it's a big and important experience to share with them and continuing improving and accepting each other to work in a diversity environment.
So Taos, let me ask you, did you ever experience in yourself any of the three groups that in initial stages when you were first exposed to cultural diversity? Did you ever see yourself in hindsight in denial, defiance, or minimization?
At the beginning, at the beginning, I think it was difficult to understand others because I didn't get the experience. So I was new in the company, and it was my first experience to work in multicultural and ethnical environment. So at the beginning, I know that it was I think it was very difficult to get integrated and adapted. But by the time I just continue improving myself and just trying to go to to other people and talking about the diversity and the difference of culture. That's it.
Okay. Thank you, Vasim. Okay, so those are the 6 stages. Sorry, Katya, did you have a question as well? No, sorry, I saw your video. Maybe I was listening. Okay, so let's try and understand cultural differences. I'm going to introduce another framework, and this is a framework that I'm particularly passionate about. So I'm going to explain that to you. About 30 years back, maybe more than 30 years back, about 1970, so no, 50 years back, there was a study by a very prominent cultural expert called Gert Hofstede. I don't know if you guys have heard about him. Some of you might have. He's one of the pioneers of cultural diversity. He went to an organization, IBM. I'm sure most of you have heard of that, and interviewed about 1,000 people, because IBM in the 70s was one of the most multicultural organizations, or at least the one that he knew. And he went and did some research, and then he came up with a framework of how do you understand different cultures and cultural diversities, etc. His studies were then later incorporated into a globe organization. The parameters evolved, and even today, it's one of the pioneers of understanding cultures. Some interesting things in that. So he actually came up with a mechanism of actually putting some metrics. So imagine that they're putting some numbers around cultural parameters. What are these parameters and how do you put this number? So the first parameter he came up with is power distance. So how much in a society are people enamored by the power and the different levels? So if you think of some cultures where, the hierarchical nature is not so prevalent. It's more integrated. So the distance between the different levels of power are not so much. Some other societies, the hierarchy is very strong, and so the distance between the levels is recognized and cherished a lot more. So power distance was a parameter he came up with in order to understand cultural differences. So for every country in the world, believe it or not, he gives a rating between 1 and 5 of where that country's society in general has a power distance factor. And I'll explain what these metrics mean in a little while, but I'll go through that. The second parameter he came about is individualism and collectivism. How much is the individual effort in that society appreciated and looked upon as opposed to the part of the group? So if you think of a socialist country, typical socialist country, that will have a very low score on individualism. It'll have, so low score on individual means it's high on collectivism. So that kind of parameter measurement is again another one. Masculinity, how much is the celebration of being male, the differences towards female, etc. How much is that male element more prevalent? That's again a unit of measurement. Uncertainty avoidance. So how much do societies eliminate uncertainty? So the risk taking, how much societies are willing to take risk and how much do they don't want to take risk and they want to avoid uncertainty about the future. Another parameter is long-term orientations. How much do societies plan for the future and have that vision to have long-term? Obviously, I must say, with this pandemic, you would wish that a lot more societies had long-term orientation, but that's the nature of the world. But that's typically a measure. So there's a measure of each country in terms of long-term orientation and how they are. And another one is indulgence. How indulgent is a particular society. Some societies are obviously much more indulgent. I won't name names, but you'll see that in some of the sample records I have. So based on that, if you Google Gert, G-E-R-T, Hofstede, and I'm putting it on the chat. By the way, guys, I've also put, slightly off topic, I've also put a SurveyMonkey link Some of you might leave a little early, but please, I would love your feedback on this session and the content and delivery, etc. It's a 2-minute survey feedback. Put it on the chat. If you're all leaving early, please, if you don't mind, to click on it and give me 2 minutes of feedback. Thank you. Coming back to this topic, I'm going to just type in who this person is. And you can Google him, and on his website, he's got all these parameters. So I've taken 4 countries, actually 8, if you guys can see it. And you can see their scores in terms of how. So if you see Norway, for example, a typical Scandinavian country, I know, George, you mentioned Sweden, I've taken Norway. You can see the masculinity rate is so low, because in Sweden and in Norway and the Scandinavian countries, the male-female the perception of equality in that society is very, very high. Whereas something like a Japan, it's perceived as much lower. Now, it doesn't mean that this is a hard-coded number. So that's something I want to explain. This is based on a holistic survey. And the way these numbers have come is a very holistic nature. It doesn't mean that every individual from that society will have this parameter. The idea of these numbers and these parameters is to understand the society. So it's to understand the background in which someone grew up in. It doesn't mean that he absolutely is conforming to all of these parameters. Some of them could be slightly different. But at least by knowing the background, you might see some parameters that you are different to, and it gives you that ability to build the bridge. All of this is about bridge building. It's not about looking at someone from, for example, it's not looking at someone from United States and their individualism is very high. So it's not looking at them and saying, oh, you guys don't think of the group at all. That's not what this is for. This is more for really understanding that if you come in from India, where there's a little more groupism, and you meet someone from the United States, it's appreciation that the person from the United States might be a little more geared in his original society, in his upbringing, towards having individualism as a trait. And so it gives you the ability to build that bridge and understand that, okay, for someone from this culture, it's typically going to be a little more individualistic. That might be my opportunity to learn and grow in order to build that bridge. That's the idea of these parameters. Any questions or comments on Gert Hofstede's work? I've taken 8 countries. If you Google it and go to his website, it pretty much has every country in the world, and you can look up that country and compare it in terms of their numbers. I've given you 8 that's there, but you can do charts and you can do this and you can have a play with that. It's free. Anyone can go there and anyone can play around. Any observations on these parameters or some of the numbers that are there? Even if it's are you surprised by something? Do you strongly believe that you come from the culture and that's very true? Any comments, just to make this interactive? No? George, you mentioned about Sweden. I don't know if that's because you are from Sweden or you just know Scandinavians a lot.
You mentioned collectivism and socialism, and that's why
Yes.
I told you don't go into that because it's not about that. So that was my comment. Sweden is, and Scandinavia is, they are socialistic countries, or let's say they focus on their individuals, but they are also individualistic in the same time. So this socialism is not connected to this dimension.
So I have to be very careful on some of the terminologies. I wasn't quite talking about the government way and the society. This is just about how individualistic, how much individual winning is celebrated as opposed to team winning. I think that's a little more primitive than socialism, communism, or any of those societal organizations. And I did use the word socialism. I think a better way to have explained that is about individual glory and individual achievement. How much is that cherished across as compared to a team winning and the society in general? Alex makes a point. It's important to learn. Sorry. Alex mentioned it's important to learn cultural difference to interact better. Absolutely, and that is the whole point. This is a starting point. It's not a judgment on a society. By looking at this, you get the starting point. You still have to connect. Remember, every individual is unique. So you still have to connect to the individual. But by looking at these numbers, you know what was the environment the individual grew up in. Okay. So what happens when, and according to Gert of Syria as well, he's got a very interesting staged response in terms of what happens when we go to new cultures. So when we travel abroad, Internations is a fantastic platform for people like us who have gone from one country to another. A lot of us have. So what happens when we go into a new culture? Typically, there are 4 responses. So you have the honeymoon period, right? You go to a new culture. It's typically when you go on holiday for a week, 2 weeks to any new cultural thing. It's great. Everything seems new. You're very curious. You are in a honeymoon period. You're fascinated by things. And it's okay. You haven't missed your old habits so much. It's all new and it's lovely. So there's typically a period of honeymoon. It could be a few days, it could be a few weeks, it could even be a few months, but it depends. So it's a honeymoon period. Then after that is a distress shock stage. Now, some of you might skip the honeymoon period. Honeymoon period might only be a few hours, maybe a day. You might go very quickly into a distress shock stage. It's so dramatically different than what you're used to that it shocks you. And you go into a bit of a shell and you're very, very uncomfortable at what you're being exposed to. And at one point, you then start the process of reintegration. You're like, okay, this is all the new. I need to start from scratch. I need to develop my habits, my way of communication, my preferences, etc. It starts from scratch, and you start the process of reintegration. And at one point, you reach a certain level of autonomy where you're comfortable in the new environment. Now, it doesn't mean that everyone will go through each of these 4 stages. You might have almost none of one particular stage. You might go into another stage, but these are a framework of 4 stages that people who enter into new cultures will typically be faced with. And then the 5th stage, is a reverse culture shock. This is the reverse culture shock when you have full autonomy of entering a new culture. If you go back to your original culture, and I'll very curious later on, I want people please to give me their experiences, you suddenly feel alienated. You look at people, and you have seen these examples. I'm confident most of you have seen these examples, where someone comes from a particular culture, they have almost a rejection of their own culture at some point after a high level of reintegration and autonomy, that when they go back, it almost feels like a fish out of the water. It's like they're so different. I've seen that. I come from India. I've seen a lot of people who are brought up here or left their country a long time. They travel back to India after such a long period, and it's a shock to them. Even though that was their original culture, but so much period has passed and they've reintegrated and been into their host culture so much that when they go back, even though that's the origin, it's a shock for them. That's the reverse cultural shock. Okay. So I want to introduce another concept, and this one, I'm not going to put any bullet points, but this is something I'm trying out as well, which is to project a message using images. And this is very, very important. We all talk about treating everyone equally, right? There's another concept, which is about providing everyone with equity. What does that mean? Okay, and there's a difference between treating everyone equally and providing everyone with the same equity. Okay, treating everyone equally in this diagram, you can see what the difference is. We all talk about everyone should be treated equally, but you can see this diagram why that's not always the optimal solution as opposed to providing people with the same equity. In this example, the wall is your systemic challenges that corporations face. Providing everyone with the same box is maybe not the optimal solution. So you see this typically in organizations and in cultures. Everyone's getting the same, but some people probably don't even need that stool, and they're still getting it. It doesn't change anything. Some people need more than one stool in order to see the view, and that's why. Again, similar example. And here we introduce the concept of justice. Eventually, you fix the underlying problems where equal and equity is interchangeably linked. I hope people can see the diagram clearly on the screen, and it's a very powerful diagram in terms of understanding society and why it's not about treating everyone equally. It's about providing the same opportunity to everyone. And this is slightly funny because what happens in the real world typically is the inequality is really skewed towards the haves and so on. And removing the underlying challenges, underlying societal problems means you're finally in a liberated state where no one really needs any support and everyone's standing in their own feet. So before I proceed, any comments, please, on equity and equality and why treating everyone equally is sometimes not the most optimal way to achieve equity and opportunity for everyone. Any comments, observations on this slide? Okay, got a shy audience today, that's fine. So having taken all these concepts and all of these frameworks, how can you translate that into making it about you? What does it mean to me? I have lots of multicultural friends and I'm okay. So how can I take it to that next level? And that's where we want to take some practical things about our approaches to diversity. Okay, first piece is about being genuinely curious. And when I talk about curiosity, it's not just cultural diversity. If you go back to my first slide, I talked about human groupings, and human groupings occurs at multiple levels. So when diversity is thrown at us across all of those groupings, if you can develop a habit of manipulating your impulse to be curious in nature and building on that, that's the first step to making the most of the diversity around you. Always a good emotion to have is to be curious. Think always about building the bridges as opposed to why am I different? How can I protect my island a little more? I know that sounds a bit cliche, but if you generally develop, and when I talk about developing, it's about building, right? You might think I always do that anyway. I always build bridges. That's okay. But You can always get better. Think about how you can be better, how you can be more curious, how you can be more bridge builder as opposed to island protector. And I invite you to consider, as human beings, we all have bits of island protector. We all have bits of bridge builder. It's about building the bridge builder to a next level. Remember the slide before about equity and equality. Absorb that and understand why equity is important for the better good of everything around us in the ecosystem. And it's crucial. Again, it sounds very obvious and very simple, but try to, build on that building bridges part is also to learn and to integrate. We talked about the stages. Be practical in terms of how you can integrate with your ecosystem. Let's talk about sensitive to diversity and so Taos or Camellia, however you like to be called, I like what you said. Yes, equality is treat everyone the same way, but the equity is the quality of being fair and impartial. But there's a little more to this, Taos. I hope you got that. We don't live in a perfect world, and sometimes some people need more than others to see the green and to benefit from what is there in this planet. And so they need a little more. Providing them a little more doesn't mean you're being unequal or unfair towards someone else. It's giving everyone the opportunity to enjoy our ecosystem, our planet, our environment in the best possible way. And that's where it's slightly different about the equity. So coming back to the sensitivity to diversity. Again, I want to take some really practical, and I want to give you some of my experiences. Hopefully that encourages you guys as well. So typically, the ecosystem I was brought up in, there is not that element of the please and thank you. When I was growing up, you only said please if you really are begging for something. You only say thank you, and I'm exaggerating a little bit, when someone's really saved your life. To say thank you is a huge thing. To say please is like literally you're begging for something. You wouldn't normally use please and thank you naturally in the language. That was my ecosystem. I won't say it's all of India. I mean, I don't want to generalize too much. 1.2 billion people is a lot of people. But at least as I was growing up, that was my culture. When I first came to England 24 years back, I remember when I got into a public transport bus, people were getting off, and as they were getting off, they were thanking the driver. I was like, I would never have been exposed to anything like that. I wouldn't even maintain eye contact with the driver. He's doing this job. He's driving a bus. I'm getting off the bus because I need to get somewhere. The whole thought of just turning around and saying thank you to him would never have even entered my mind. So I grew up in that ecosystem. Now, does that make me a rude person? Yes, when I meet someone from an ecosystem where the please and a thank you is liberally used in all sentences, they interacting with me, their first impression of me would be that I'm very rude. Where I was grown up, I was hardly rude. I was a perfectly normal person. I had good friends. I had healthy relationships. I had healthy communication without the need to use the please and the thank you at such levels. And that's important, to understand and be sensitive to people's culture and how they come up with. Assertiveness is another mechanism and another thing that we are very diverse in. How assertive is our tone? Typically, and without generalization, there are a lot of people in Asian cultures where there's a difference in levels of assertiveness. Again, assertiveness from males and females, again, in different cultures is different. So it's important to have an idea about assertiveness and what that cultural norm is where they grew up. And it's important to recognize it's not a reflection of your judgment of their politeness, assertiveness, etc. It's very possible that their journeys makes them, what's normal for them is different than what's normal for you. Again, if you're curious, you're trying to build bridge, it's important to be sensitive to that. And something again, it's about certain words are very sensitive in certain cultures. Again, you know, we all know there was a very famous footballer, a South American footballer, very recently in the news. He came to UK. He plays for a very big football club, and he was putting something in his Twitter. He called someone in a South American name that in South America is looked on as a very affectionate, normal thing to use. In the UK, in the English language, that's looked down upon and frowned, and it has a racist connotation to it. So he was using a word that in his culture, in his native hometown, would have been perfectly okay, and was his friend. And he was referring to him in a particular affectionate way. So I won't repeat the word, but it's a word that's derogatorily used towards people of color, especially in America, where it's a very, very negatively used word. In South America, it's commonly used. Again, when I was growing up, and I'll see another example from my own personal example. So I grew up in India. Obviously, most of you know we were very rivals with people from Pakistan. When I was growing up, just like you would call Australians Aussies, you would call people from Pakistan a short name as well. But it was very common as I was growing up. I remember when an Indian cricket team toured Pakistan, it didn't happen very frequently. You'd see the word in the stadiums, you know, they would be referred by their short name. When I came to England, I suddenly very quickly realized that the short name is a very, I didn't want to put that in explicitly. You want to be very sensitive. It's referred to in a very, very negative and derogatory way. And it was a learning for me, because I would happily have called someone, just like, you know, we are happy to call Australians Aussies, right? That's a perfectly natural thing to do. There's nothing derogatory about it. We call the English people Pomps. The Australians call the English Pomps. There's nothing derogatory. But a short form of the word Pakistan is very, very derogatory in this culture here. Absolutely, Vassam. It's very, very derogatory. If you came here and you use that term with an Asian person, you will go to jail. I mean, maybe it's exaggeration, but that's very close. So you have to be very, very careful. And that's the education element. Certain things in certain cultures are very, very derogatory. It was a learning for me as well, Vassam, as now it is for you. Do not come to England and UK and use that term. It is very derogatory. But you can see why people can make these mistakes. There's a lot of education and training, or at least they should, in terms of cultural, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. Anything that's even slightly gray, you need to roll back from that. And you need to have an education on what's acceptable, terminologies, etc., in the culture you work in. It's hugely important. And social media, I mean, I don't know if you guys have been, I mean, I don't know how many of you follow cricket, but recently, as recently as 3 days back, in England, there was an English cricketer. He's now 28, and he's really worked very hard through the local levels, etc. And he has now got his first match representing England. On the second day that he was playing, some news channel dug up a tweet he had made as an 18-year-old, so almost 10 years back. And he said something really nasty, something racist. I don't even know what that was, but it was heavily racist, and it was a nasty tweet. So you can imagine 10 years back as a teenager, drunk in college, or maybe not, or just having banter and writing something nasty in Twitter. 10 years later, when he's obviously a family man, he's got a wife, he's got kids, etc., he's playing for England, worked hard. He is now suspended from playing for England, because even though it was 10 years back. Now, you might debate whether it's the right thing to do or not right thing to do, and there's people on both sides. But the point is, this is the society we live in. This is what it is, and we have to be in the society. We have to be sensitive, and the scope of political incorrectness is now much less. And understanding why we are in the world we are right now, and why it's important to be politically correct, is important. And you see, it's all about the equity. It's about making people feel comfortable. So you're not doing something because, oh my God, this political correctness is too extreme. I had that feeling as well. But when you think about it wider, you know, the reason you need to be so politically correct and limit yourself to things that are inclusive in nature is so that people have equity and people feel equity. You promote that feeling by restricting your languages to something that's positive in nature at all times. And that's why it's important. Indeed, Justin Trudeau has plenty of incidents. We could write a book on him. In fact, there is a website where there's a whole bunch of Justin Trudeau quotes where he's said some wonderful things, by the way, and also said some not so wonderful things. Okay, one or two more slides, and then I want to open up for the wider group. But what are we doing time-wise? We're doing okay. Conflict in diverse teams. So what happens in conflict? And when there's diverse teams, more often than not, you'll see conflict. George, sorry, I just read your thing. This is debatable, as in some organization cultures, they see political correctness as a downside. I don't know any modern organization where political correctness is not encouraged to the highest level and political incorrectness is not frowned upon. That is the modern organization. If there is an outlier out there, that's great. I'm not saying that's great. That's not great. But there's more understanding and appreciation, and that's what I was trying to explain in this theme, why political correctness is important and why political incorrectness is frowned upon. Hopefully there's a context I've given you, but we can have this debate later on if you feel there's an alternate view. Coming down to conflict in diverse teams, there's two different types of conflict that happens, and I want to separate out. One is cognitive conflict. Okay, and I'll explain the two in a little more detail. In general, cognitive conflict is actually very healthy. Relationship conflict is not healthy. In most conflicts, you'll have a small element of both, at least, but then one takes over. Ideally, you want cognitive conflict. Cognitive conflict is when there's a difference of opinion, a difference of thought, and difference of path to reach a solution. Menace conflict is about feeling offended or when there's a misunderstanding. That's the relationship conflict, and that's where it's healthy. Cognitive conflict is actually when you just have a difference of thought, a difference of opinion, a difference of belief in how to reach your goal. That kind of conflict is actually very, very healthy. You know, having a different opinion, a different thought is healthy. It develops a wider spectrum of ideas. It reduces the risk in a particular thought and idea. It actually contributes to the wider group and positive. Relationship conflict is when you don't like someone, when it's emotional. And so a lot of the conflict is driven by the emotion, not by the thought. And that's unhealthy. Now, in most conflicts, there's a small element of relationship as well, but you want to maximize cognitive conflict, because cognitive conflict gives you the widest and the most diverse and the richest spectrum of thoughts, solutions, and ideas. It minimizes risk. They say the more, if you're building teams, if you're in a leadership position and you're building teams, you want to encourage cognitive conflict in your team, because that more often than not, in fact, in almost all cases, will lead to better decisions. And usually when this conflict and it fails, when diversity fails, the key part of that failure is the value being different. If people have similar values and a similar goal, then you want cognitive conflict so that everyone's finding the best way to reach that goal in shared values. If your goals are different, your values are different, that's when cognitive conflict very quickly moves over to a relationship conflict. So now that you have a framework of understanding conflict and you know what one type of conflict is healthy and another type of conflict is unhealthy, how do you manage that conflict? This is particularly relevant to people who manage teams, but even if you're not managing teams, if you're part of a team, this is still important. Reaching out to people, simple things like team building events. You always wonder, oh my God, why is there another team building event? What is the point of team building? A lot of people might wonder, it's just another corporate freebie. But the intent, the execution might not be perfect, but the intent is actually quite good, because by doing team building, a celebration of festivals, having in an American organization, there's this concept of happy hours, in English cultures as well, basically where you meet as a team, whether physically or in the modern post-pandemic world, virtually in a Zoom session, and you just have a chat. It doesn't have to be about work. It's just knowing each other, etc., having a few jokes, etc., being comfortable with each other, talking about our lives, etc. That then builds the relationship element, so you can have more cognitive conflict without it slipping into relationship. Again, if you're leading a team, or even if you're part of a team, make sure you have a good understanding, encourage, promote common goals and common values. It's important. And you shouldn't really have diversification of values, because most organizations promote values. If anyone working in a multinational company, you will have that. Your HR department, they all have sets of values that they promote and say, this organization has these values. So make sure you're converging to those. And even within your team, make sure you're having convergence in values. Again, always encourage open communication. Here's a statement that some people might find it difficult. You should personally encourage cognitive conflict. You should encourage, difference of opinions. You should encourage people sharing views. You should encourage people who have a different view to you to come up and bring some ideas to the table. You should do that by actually showing maximum respect when a different point of view is made, in a way that encourages that. Any questions or comments around conflict and managing conflict? Okay,